hope you all had a great New Year's Eve. Personally, for me, I think I just stayed in with my cat and played some video games. Nothing particularly exciting, but, I've seen that some people had a great New Year's Eve and did some really exciting things, like, say, Patton Oswalt. So he's the one in the picture who looks like a butch lesbian. For those who haven't really heard of Patton Oswalt before, he's one of those guys who's kind of in everything. He's an actor, he's a comedian. The role that I can think of most famously of his is probably Remy in Ratatouille. But I digress. You've probably seen him in something. So New Year's Eve, Oswald actually managed to do a stand-up set with one of his best friends, a guy who he's been friends with for over 35 years, and that's quote-unquote controversial comedian Dave Chappelle. Now, I've discussed Dave Chappelle on this channel a number of times, but just to kind of summarise a little bit, Dave Chappelle has often been grossly miscategorised by progressives as being a transphobe because they have willingly taken his stand-up sets on Netflix out of context. He has made jokes about trans people, but he's also made jokes about lots of different minority or majority groups, whether they be white people or Asian people or even black people. It's kind of what he does. He's a comedian. But he is one of the most controversial characters for trans people nowadays, probably second only to She Who Must Not Be Named. And as a result of, meeting up with his friends and getting a photo taken, the tranners were upset. Because, of course they were. I mean, how dare you take a photo with your friend? Have you not thought about the multiple pronoun people who, don't really have a life? And the outrage got so much that Oswald had to apologise, or he felt like he had to apologise. In fact, there he is in this photograph that he took of himself writing his apology, so he is really sincere about what he is saying. So his apology is quite long-worded, so I'm not going to read it all out, but just to summarise, he defends his friendship with Dave Chappelle, which he shouldn't really have to do, it's his friend. But, he has to show his loyalty to the order, of course, and so he makes it very, very clear that he is 100% opposed to Dave Chappelle's views on trans people, and, they couldn't be more far apart. There's absolutely no explanation as to what Dave Chappelle's views on trans people even are in here. There's no mention of it at all, so Dave Chappelle doesn't come across as a hateful person for trans people, for me. So, is Oswald saying that he actually does hate the tranners? Probably not, but again, he's just saying things to appease the mob here, and that mob ideology is something which you really need to recognise as going on. His apology didn't really wash with either side in this, let's be honest. The tranners were naturally outraged that this wasn't a good enough apology. There were some people who were comparing Dave Chappelle to Hitler, that this is not good enough for an ally, you need to be a better ally. On the other side, you had people pointing out that he's kind of throwing his friend under the bus, and there were even a few people who brought up sketches that Oswald had done in the past, where he's made jokes about trans people. There's obviously a lot of context that's missing in these. I can't show the clips because of, copyright, but there's going to be a lot more. It isn't just going to be him pointing at people and shouting, "Look, a tranny." Now, Oswald comes across as a nice guy. I don't know what all of his views are on things. I'm sure he is a progressive, and I'm sure he probably might not think the best of people like myself, but who knows? I mean, he's friends with Dave Chappelle, and Chappelle isn't, he doesn't see Chappelle as a monster. But the point that I want to make in this video is more about the way in which Oswald felt kind of pressured in order to make an apology here, and I kind of wanted to say that he seems like a nice guy, and he seems like he means well, because when you fall into these kinds of situations where you have a progressive social justice mob coming after you, a lot of people are generally nice, and they don't want to be seen as though they're upsetting people on purpose. And that's probably the reason why he issued his apology. He genuinely probably didn't want to upset people. But, and I can say this from personal experience, apologising is the single worst thing that you can do. And let me go into why by kind of talking about my own experience with social justice outrage mobs. So I run a relatively controversial YouTube channel, you can say, and I've developed my own set of haters. I've had people who have sent all sorts of abusive messages to me, and I know that in particular with the trans rights activist crowd, I'm generally not liked, and again that's important, and tie that in with the mob mentality. So some of you might remember around this time last year, actually, I put out a admittedly ill thought out tweet about ContraPoints. Now, you all know that we don't really get along. It was a jab at a relapse in drug addiction that she had had, and I'd said, well, I'm often accused of being self-hating, but drug addiction is a self-hating behaviour. It's not the most sensitive thing, and whilst a lot of people were angry about it, there were also some followers of mine and people who I respect who saw it as a dig against basically drug addiction, and I genuinely felt bad for saying it. And so I put out an apology, just saying, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset anyone. And that was the stupidest possible thing that I could have done, because before that I was getting a few hundred abusive messages, and it was then cranked up to thousands, and a lot of that was thanks to Lindsay Ellis. Now, for those paying attention, that is the same Lindsay Ellis who has now recently quit YouTube because hate mobs have come after her as well, and there she was openly encouraging one against me. As a result of that, I've received thousands of abusive messages of all sorts about my appearance, about my voice, about my intelligence, the fact that I'm scum. I got a couple of death threats in there as well. People got incredibly, incredibly angry. And I didn't handle the situation very well. I mean, bear in mind that this was during lockdown. I hadn't had a lot of interactions with people that weren't on the internet, so shutting off was quite hard. But the point of the outrage mob, when I looked at some of the terms of apology that people were putting forward, became very, very clear that they weren't really upset about the comment that I made regarding ContraPoints. That was more being used as a trigger to attack, and that what they wanted was for me to shut down my channel. They wanted me to, donate to causes of their choosing, basically grovel, and maybe they might see in their benevolent nature, they might be willing to maybe forgive me. But I moved on from it, and I see that as a massive learning experience, because I didn't take it seriously how these hate mobs operate and why they do what they do. In fact, one of the best documents that I've seen on these online hate mobs is actually something called SJWs Always Lie, Taking Down the Thought Police, written by Vox Day. And it is a book with several other sections in it, but this also has one particular section on how SJW attacks work, or progressive attacks, or cancel mobs, whatever kind of phrases that you want to use. Basically, they will target people according to their narrative. They will wait for you to slip up. When you do, they will try and hone in on an apology, and they'll make it seem like you just need to apologise and everything will go away. And you do apologise, and that's when they see the weakness, and that's when they swarm in. And that's when because they see the blood in the water, effectively. And so they will swarm in and attack you more and more and more until they basically get their way. And, you could, in my instance, it was locking my Twitter accounts for a couple of hours, and they would end up doing the last stage, which is the victory parade, where they celebrate their justified win over the evil Rose of Dawn in this instance. Really, this is just a Maoist struggle session being played out online and social media. And that's the way that a lot of these people operate, because they're not bothered about the quote-unquote infraction that you've done. They have a bigger target in mind, which is just the taking down of you as a person, to discredit you as much as possible and shut you down. But how does this really relate to Patton Oswalt? After all, there was a lot of people who didn't accept his apology. There were some people who had, and afterwards he went back to just posting pictures of cats. But the attack still served a purpose, and two purposes, really. First of all is effectively putting him on watch. It's like, don't step out of line again. I mean, you had a lot of people pointing out, he's not a good ally for taking a photo of him and his friend. But the real target wasn't Oswald himself, it was Dave Chappelle. And this is kind of part of a campaign that's been raging against Chappelle for the past couple of months, since The Closer came out on Netflix. Now, Chappelle understands how these people operate. It's why he hasn't apologized to them yet, and he is taking the right steps there by not doing that. As a result of that, they get very desperate, but they need to take him down because he's still being put up on their favourite streaming platforms. So they take whatever steps that they can and try and isolate him as much as possible. So they're trying to make sure that his friends aren't willing to associate with him, almost in the same way that if you look at what's happened with J.K. Rowling. They don't want the Harry Potter actors to associate with her. They don't want other authors to associate with her. All of this is part of the SJW attack. And this is pretty much what has been happening here. Oswald himself is just more the collateral, but he has been put on notice. Don't upset us again, because it could get worse. I mean, had Oswald been attacked specifically for some of the things that he has said in previous stand-up routines, it might be a bit of a different situation. But here, it's because of Chappelle, who is the bigger target. So it's always important to remember that the reason why you don't apologise is because it will never, ever be enough for these people. They're not looking for an apology. They're just looking for a sign of weakness. And just a big, essay of an apology is that sign of weakness that they're looking for, but they want to scare him away from Dave Chappelle. So thank you all for watching. If you enjoy my videos, please like and subscribe. I did have quite a big break from YouTube, so that really, really helps me out. I have got seal of approval coming up tomorrow. And also, here is some footage of Cammy sitting on a chair, because a lot of you are probably wondering where Cammy is, and that there she is, on the chair. So thank you all for tuning in. If you like what I do, please support me on Patreon and Subscribestar, and I will see you all next time.